About Starling.
Do you mean an unfair assassinations?
Shut it down. The Starling has been They're intelligent. They're dangerous. And they'll do. Train them to do.
He is coming.
Attack. The rules change.
Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, Ghost War, 2026, represents a comprehensive cinematic expansion of the beloved streaming series, and this text provides a complete set of analyses and explanations of the film's narrative, themes, characters, and production elements. The movie arrives as a direct continuation of the Amazon Prime Video series, bridging the gap between episodic storytelling and feature-length presentation, with John Krasinski returning not only as the titular character, but also as a writer and producer, thereby imprinting a deeply personal creative vision onto the project. The very existence of Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, Ghost War as a streaming-exclusive film rather than a theatrical release speaks volumes about the changing landscape of media distribution. By premiering on Amazon Prime Video after a token theatrical premiere at Regal Cinemas in Times Square, the movie acknowledges the platform that birthed its narrative while simultaneously reaching for cinematic legitimacy, creating a hybrid identity that defines its entire aesthetic approach. Andrew Bernstein's direction brings a sense of visual continuity from the series to the film, as he had previously helmed multiple episodes of the show. His understanding of the characters' rhythms allows the transition to a longer format to feel organic rather than jarring, even though the pacing must necessarily shift to accommodate a story that needs to resolve itself within roughly 105 minutes rather than across 8 hours of television. The screenplay by Aaron Rabin and John Krasinski, working from a story conceived by Krasinski and Noah Oppenheim, attempts to balance the intellectual espionage that fans loved in the series with the kind of set-piece action that film audiences have come to expect from the Jack Ryan brand. This tension between brain and brawn becomes the central creative conflict of the entire production, a push and pull that is visible in every frame of the finished movie. Jack Ryan's character arc in Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, Ghost War begins with him in a state of self-imposed exile from the intelligence community. Having left the CIA behind, he now works in hedge fund risk management on Wall Street, a career choice that weaponizes his analytical mind in service of capitalism rather than national security, a detail that speaks to how the skills cultivated by spy agencies have dual uses in the private sector. The absence of Kathy Mueller from the narrative is a significant and deliberately unexplained choice. For fans who invested in the romantic subplot of the series, this omission creates a palpable void around Ryan, positioning him as a man untethered from personal connections and therefore more susceptible to being drawn back into the dangerous world he tried to leave behind. A classic noir protagonist setup repurposed for modern geopolitical thriller conventions. James Greer's evolution into CIA deputy director represents a seismic shift in the power dynamics between the two lead characters. Where the series often positioned Greer as the experienced field operative guiding a younger analyst, the film inverts this relationship by making Greer a figure of institutional authority whose past decisions now threaten to destroy everything he has built, forcing Ryan to become his moral compass once again. Wendell Pierce's performance as Greer carries the weight of a man who has made terrible compromises in the name of what he believed was right. The revelation that he created Project Starling in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks adds a layer of historical tragedy to his character, connecting the fictional narrative to real-world moral questions about how democracies respond to existential threats and whether the ends can ever truly justify the means. The Dubai setting of the opening sequence serves multiple narrative and thematic functions. As a city that represents extreme wealth, architectural ambition, and geopolitical complexity, Dubai provides a visually striking backdrop for the film's exploration of how intelligence operations have become entangled with global finance, mirroring Ryan's own journey from Wall Street back to the field. Nigel Cook's death early in the film establishes the stakes with brutal efficiency. As a senior MI6 officer and Greer's former partner in Project Starling, Cook represents a generation of intelligence operatives whose methods are now coming back to haunt them, and his desperate attempt to expose the truth before being killed creates the mystery that drives the entire plot forward. The cigarette pack that Cook hands to Ryan functions as a classic MacGuffin, an object whose significance is initially unclear, but which contains the key to unraveling the conspiracy. This device connects Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan Ghost War to a long tradition of spy thrillers where seemingly mundane objects carry world-altering secrets, from microfilms to encrypted drives. Mike November's return as Ryan's field operations mentor provides both comic relief and tactical expertise. Michael Kelly's performance continues to ground the more outlandish elements of the plot in practical, operational reality, as his character possesses the kind of hard-won knowledge that can only come from years of surviving situations that should have killed him. The introduction of Emma Marlowe, played with sharp intelligence by Sienna Miller, adds a new dynamic to the established cast. As an MI6 officer who initially captures Ryan and November before becoming their ally, Marlowe represents a different tradition of espionage, one that is perhaps more cynical and pragmatic than the idealistic American approach that Ryan embodies. Sienna Miller's casting brings a particular kind of energy to Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan Ghost War that the franchise has occasionally lacked. Her rapid-fire dialogue delivery and analytical precision create a character who feels like a genuine intellectual equal to Ryan, someone who can keep pace with his deductive reasoning while bringing her own institutional knowledge to bear on the problems they face. Liam Crown as an antagonist represents the dark mirror of everything Greer tried to create with Project Starling. A Victoria Cross-decorated former MI6 operative, Crown has taken the ruthless efficiency that the program was designed to cultivate and turned it against the very institutions that created him, making him a monster of the state's own design. Max Beasley's portrayal of Crown avoids easy villainy in favor of something more unsettling, a man who genuinely believes in his mission. This commitment to a twisted ideology makes Crown more dangerous than a simple mercenary would be, as his actions are driven by conviction rather than profit, creating an antagonist who cannot be bought off or reasoned with through conventional means. The Victoria Cross detail in Crown's backstory is significant because it establishes him as a legitimate war hero, someone who has demonstrated extraordinary courage in service to his country. This makes his fall from grace all the more tragic and complicates the audience's relationship with him, as we are forced to acknowledge that the qualities that made him a hero are the same qualities that have transformed him into a villain. Project Starling itself functions as a metaphor for the post-9/11 security state that emerged in both the United States and the United Kingdom. The program was created to operate outside legal constraints, to do what needed to be done without the interference of oversight or accountability, and its resurrection as a rogue operation suggests that such creations can never truly be destroyed once they have been unleashed. The Tower Bridge attack plot that Crown orchestrates carries symbolic weight beyond its immediate threat. By recreating an attack that Starling had foiled 20 years earlier, Crown is making an argument through violence. That the threat of terrorism is eternal, that vigilance can never be relaxed, and that programs like Starling must exist in perpetuity to protect civilization from those who would destroy it. Elizabeth Wright's death represents one of the film's most shocking moments, a narrative choice that demonstrates the genuine stakes of the conflict. As CIA director, Wright was a character of institutional significance, and her death at the hands of a car bomb meant for Greer illustrates how violence in this world is often indiscriminate, claiming the innocent along with the guilty. Betty Gabriel's performance as Wright, though relatively brief, establishes her as a competent and principled leader whose loss is genuinely felt by both the characters and the audience. Her death serves as a catalyst for the final act, galvanizing Ryan and Greer to pursue Crown with a renewed sense of purpose that goes beyond professional obligation into the realm of personal vengeance. The revelation that MI6 Deputy Chief Andrew Speer is a traitor working with Crown introduces a layer of institutional betrayal that complicates the narrative. Speer's position within the intelligence hierarchy suggests that Crown's ideology has found purchase even among those who are supposed to be defending against it, a pessimistic assessment of how deeply the rot has spread. J.J. Field's portrayal of Speer relies on understatement rather than melodrama, presenting a man whose treason is motivated not by ideology, but by something more banal. Perhaps ambition, perhaps resentment, perhaps a genuine belief that Crown's methods are necessary. This ambiguity makes Speer a more interesting character than a simple mole would have been. The film's treatment of intelligence agencies as morally compromised institutions reflects a broader cultural skepticism toward the national security state that has developed in the decades since 9/11. Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War does not offer easy answers about whether organizations like the CIA and MI6 are forces for good or necessary evils, instead presenting them as complex entities capable of both heroism and horror. Jack Ryan's lie to Crown about leaving the stolen intelligence in Dubai demonstrates the character's continued capacity for quick thinking under pressure. Even when outmatched physically, Ryan's mind remains his primary weapon, and this moment of tactical deception buys the time needed for the final confrontation to unfold on terms more favorable to the protagonists. The return to Dubai for the climax creates a narrative symmetry that reinforces the film's thematic concerns. By ending where it began, Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War suggests that the past is never truly escaped, that the consequences of our actions circle back to find us no matter how far we run or how much we try to reinvent ourselves. The server sequence in which Ryan downloads the Starling network data represents the film's most direct engagement with its techno-thriller roots. Here, the action is intellectual rather than physical, a race against time conducted through keyboards and encryption rather than guns and fists, recalling the analytical espionage that made Tom Clancy's novels distinctive in the first place. Patrick, the former CIA colleague who assists Ryan in Dubai, represents the extended network of relationships that intelligence work creates. These bonds, forged in conditions of extreme stress and mutual dependency, persist even when individuals leave the agency, forming a shadow community that can be activated when needed. The final confrontation between Ryan and Crown strips away the geopolitical complexity to reveal a fundamentally personal conflict. When Ryan delivers the killing shot to Crown's head, he is not just ending a terrorist threat, but also closing a chapter of history that began with Greer's decision to create Project Starling 2 decades earlier, a moment of violent closure that echoes across the years. Greer's arrival with reinforcements during the climax provides a moment of cathartic relief that the film has carefully earned. Having confronted his past sins and accepted responsibility for the monster he created, Greer is now positioned as part of the solution rather than the problem, his rescue of Ryan representing a form of atonement for the damage Project Starling has caused. Speer's removal from duty by MI6 Chief Arnold demonstrates that institutional accountability is possible, even if it comes too late to prevent tragedy. This moment of bureaucratic justice provides a counterpoint to the film's darker suggestions about the irredeemability of intelligence agencies, offering a glimmer of hope that systems can correct themselves. The nomination of Ryan as deputy director of the CIA represents both a promotion and a trap. While the position acknowledges his skills and sacrifices, It also ensures that he will be even more deeply embedded in the institutional machinery he tried to escape, a bittersweet ending that reflects the franchise's understanding that duty is a cage as much as a calling. Greer's elevation to acting director following Wright's death completes his character arc from field operative to institutional leader. But the circumstances of this promotion are tragic rather than triumphant. He has achieved the highest office in the CIA, but only through the death of a colleague and the exposure of his own darkest secrets. The film's rating for violence and language represents a deliberate choice to push the material into more adult territory than the series typically occupied. This rating allows for a more visceral depiction of combat and its consequences, bringing Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan Ghost War closer in tone to the harder-edged spy thrillers of the 70s and 80s. The runtime of approximately 105 to 107 minutes places the film firmly within the conventional boundaries of the action thriller genre. This constraint forces the narrative to move at a pace that sometimes sacrifices character development for plot momentum, a trade-off that has been identified by critics as one of the film's primary weaknesses. Ramin Djawadi and William Marriott's musical score provides the emotional architecture for the film's set pieces, building tension during quiet moments and releasing it during action sequences. Djawadi's experience with large-scale genre storytelling brings a cinematic quality to the music that helps elevate the material beyond its streaming origins. The cinematography by Arnaud Valls-Colomer captures the contrasting environments of London and Dubai with a keen eye for how setting reflects character psychology. London's grey skies and institutional architecture mirror the moral ambiguity of the intelligence community, while Dubai's gleaming surfaces and artificial landscapes suggest the hollow promises of wealth and power. The production timeline, beginning principal photography in January 2025 and wrapping in late July of the same year, suggests a relatively efficient shoot by the standards of action filmmaking. This efficiency speaks to the experience of the cast and crew, many of whom had worked together on the series and could therefore operate with a shorthand that accelerated the process. Krasinski's dual role as star and writer creates an unusual degree of creative control for an actor within a franchise property. This control allows him to shape Ryan's character arc according to his own understanding of the role, but it also means that the film's successes and failures rest more directly on his shoulders than would otherwise be the case. The involvement of Sunday Night Productions, Krasinski's own production company, further cements his authorial presence in the project. This level of investment suggests that Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan Ghost War is not merely a paycheck for its star, but a genuine creative endeavor that he has shaped from conception to completion. Paramount Pictures and Skydance Media's continued involvement in the franchise demonstrates the enduring value of the Jack Ryan intellectual property. Despite the shift from theatrical films to streaming series to streaming film, the character remains commercially viable enough to attract major studio investment, a testament to the strength of Tom Clancy's original creation. Amazon MGM Studios' role as both producer and distributor reflects the vertically integrated model that streaming platforms have developed. By controlling the entire pipeline from production to distribution, Amazon can tailor the film specifically to its platform's audience, while also using it as a driver for Prime Video subscriptions. The critical reception of Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan Ghost War, particularly its 36% tomato meter score on Rotten Tomatoes, indicates a significant disconnect between the film's ambitions and its execution. This score represents a dramatic decline from the series' average of 80%, suggesting that the transition from television to film was not as successful as the creators had hoped. Kevin Marr's one-star review in The Times, describing the film as generic and personality-free, articulates a common criticism: that the movie has sanded away the distinctive qualities that made the series engaging in favor of a homogenized action thriller template. This critique suggests that the film's attempt to appeal to a broader audience resulted in a loss of identity. The characterization of the film as an awkward translation of the series captures the fundamental challenge of adapting long-form storytelling to feature length. The series had time to develop character relationships, build tension gradually, and explore the intellectual dimensions of espionage, while the film must compress these elements into a format that prioritizes immediate gratification. The observation that the film trades the franchise's mind for muscle points to a fundamental misunderstanding of what made the Jack Ryan property distinctive. Tom Clancy's novels were celebrated for their technical detail and analytical approach to geopolitics, qualities that the series preserved but that the film largely abandons in favor of conventional action sequences. M. N. Miller's critique that the film represents trading intelligence for generic action spectacle echoes a broader concern about the direction of the franchise. By prioritizing set pieces over substance, Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War risks alienating the core audience that appreciated the series' more cerebral approach to the spy genre. Tanya Hussein's assessment that the film too often settles for the safest version of itself suggests a creative conservatism that is at odds with the risk-taking ethos that the characters themselves embody. The movie plays within established boundaries rather than pushing into new territory, resulting in an experience that is competent but never surprising. The Times of India's declaration that the film is devoid of a soul represents perhaps the most damning critique, as it suggests a fundamental absence of the human element that makes espionage stories compelling. Without a beating heart at its center, the film becomes merely a sequence of events rather than a meaningful narrative experience. Peter Gray's more positive assessment, giving the film 3.5 stars out of 5 and calling it a smart, engaging extension of the series, demonstrates that the movie works better for viewers who approach it as a continuation rather than a reinvention. For those already invested in these characters, the familiar rhythms may be comforting rather than disappointing. Brandon Zachary's 6 out of 10 rating acknowledges the film's entertainment value while recognizing its limitations. This middling assessment captures the essential paradox of Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War. It is enjoyable enough while watching but leaves little lasting impression, functioning as disposable content rather than memorable cinema. Julian Lytle's characterization of the film as empty-calorie entertainment is perhaps the most precise description of its cultural function. Like fast food, it satisfies immediate cravings without providing lasting nourishment, a product designed for consumption and forgetting rather than contemplation and discussion. The film's themes regarding the burden of the past resonate with contemporary anxieties about historical accountability. Greer's creation of Project Starling represents a generation's response to trauma, and the consequences of that response continue to unfold decades later, a pattern that mirrors real-world debates about post-9/11 security policies. Trust and betrayal form the emotional core of the narrative, as Ryan must reconcile his faith in Greer with the revelation of what Greer has done. This personal crisis of confidence mirrors larger questions about whether citizens can trust the institutions that are supposed to protect them, a theme that has become increasingly relevant in an era of diminished institutional credibility. The thematic tension between intelligence and muscle that critics have identified is not merely a matter of aesthetic preference, but reflects a genuine philosophical disagreement about what espionage work actually entails. The series argued that analysis and understanding are more powerful than violence. The film suggests the opposite, and this shift has significant implications for how the audience perceives the work of intelligence agencies. The cost of duty is measured in the film through what Ryan has lost: his relationship with Kathy, his civilian life, his peace of mind. These sacrifices are presented as the inevitable price of service, but the film stops short of questioning whether the price is too high, accepting the premise that some individuals must surrender their personal happiness for the greater good. Ryan's progression from Wall Street analyst back to CIA deputy director traces an arc that suggests true vocation cannot be escaped. No matter how far he runs or how successfully he reinvents himself, the intelligence community reclaims him, a deterministic view of character that is both romantic and tragic. The film's treatment of Kathy's absence is notable for what it does not say. By removing her from the narrative without explanation, the movie avoids the domestic complications that might slow its momentum, but also eliminates an important dimension of Ryan's humanity, reducing him to a purely professional figure. The globe-trotting structure of the narrative, moving from Dubai to London and back again, creates a sense of scope that helps justify the feature-length format. These location changes provide visual variety and reinforce the idea that the threats Ryan faces are global rather than local in nature. The film's action sequences, particularly the chase through Dubai and the final confrontation, are staged with technical proficiency that reflects the crew's experience with the series. These set pieces deliver the visceral excitement that audiences expect from the genre, even if they do not innovate within it. The political dimensions of Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War are deliberately muted compared to the novel's often explicit ideological positioning. The film avoids taking clear stands on contemporary geopolitical issues, instead using the framework of international terrorism as a relatively safe antagonist that does not risk alienating any particular segment of the audience. The depiction of MI6 as an institution wrestling with its own demons provides a counterpoint to the CIA's struggles, suggesting that the crisis of legitimacy facing intelligence agencies is not uniquely American, but extends across the Western alliance. This international perspective adds depth to what might otherwise be a parochial narrative. The film's use of flashback and exposition to explain Project Starling's origins creates a historical texture that enriches the present-day action. By connecting current events to decisions made 2 decades earlier, the narrative suggests that the past is never truly past, that old sins cast long shadows. The relationship between Ryan and Marlowe develops with a professional respect that avoids the romantic clichés often imposed on male-female partnerships in the spy genre. This restraint allows their collaboration to feel authentic rather than contrived, 2 competent professionals working together without the distraction of sexual tension. The film's ending, with Ryan promoted to deputy director, positions the character for a different kind of future than the one the series had suggested. Rather than remaining a field-adjacent analyst, Ryan is now fully embedded in the institutional hierarchy, a shift that would fundamentally change the nature of any subsequent stories. The absence of announced plans for continuation after Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War means that this ending functions as a conclusion rather than a cliffhanger. The narrative provides enough closure to satisfy viewers while leaving the door open, just enough to accommodate future installments if demand materializes. Krasinski's investment in the character over multiple seasons and now a feature film represents a significant commitment in an era when actors frequently move between projects. This dedication has allowed him to develop Ryan in ways that would be impossible in a standalone film, creating a layered performance that carries the accumulated history of the series. The film's exploration of how institutions create and then disavow their own monsters is perhaps its most politically resonant theme. Project Starling was authorized at the highest levels, yet those who authorized it have moved on or died, leaving operatives like Crown to face the consequences of policies they did not design but were ordered to implement. The moral complexity of Crown's position is that he is not entirely wrong in his analysis, even if his methods are abhorrent. The film acknowledges that the terrorist threats he seeks to combat are real, that the bureaucratic constraints he resents can be paralyzing, and that the line between necessary ruthlessness and unacceptable brutality is often unclear in practice. The film's relationship with the broader Tom Clancy universe is one of selective continuity. Characters and situations from the series are carried forward, but the larger mythology of the novels is largely ignored in favor of a self-contained narrative that does not require familiarity with the source material. The commercial performance of Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, Ghost War on Amazon Prime Video, will likely determine the future of the franchise more than its critical reception. Streaming platforms measure success differently than theatrical distributors, and strong viewership numbers could overcome negative reviews to justify further investment. The film's legacy within the Jack Ryan franchise will likely be as a transitional work, one that attempted to move the property into a new format with mixed results. Future assessments may be kinder if the film is understood as a pilot for a new phase of storytelling rather than a definitive statement. The craft elements of the production, from production design to costume to sound, maintain the high standard established by the series. These technical achievements provide a baseline of quality that partially compensates for narrative shortcomings, ensuring that the film is always watchable even when it is not fully engaging. John Krasinski's physical performance, as Ryan continues to emphasize the character's reluctant relationship with violence. When Ryan kills Crown, there is no triumph in the act, only grim necessity, a choice that preserves the character's moral center, even as he commits an act that would be traumatic for anyone outside the context of righteous violence. The film's treatment of death as a constant possibility, rather than a rare event, distinguishes it from more escapist action cinema. Major characters die, and their deaths have consequences that reverberate through the remaining narrative, creating a world that feels genuinely dangerous rather than safely predictable. The intelligence community depicted in the film is one in which moral clarity is impossible. Every character operates in shades of gray, making compromises and calculations that would be unacceptable in civilian life, but are presented as necessary within the context of national security work. The audience for Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, Ghost War is likely divided between series fans seeking closure and casual viewers looking for a competent action thriller. The film attempts to serve both constituencies and, according to the mixed reception, achieves only partial success in either direction. The film ultimately stands as a testament to the enduring appeal of the Jack Ryan character, while also demonstrating the challenges of adapting him to changing media landscapes. Created by Tom Clancy in the Cold War context of the 1980s, Ryan has survived into an era of streaming content and asymmetric threats, evolving while retaining his essential identity as the analyst who would rather think than fight but will do what is necessary. The complete analysis of Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War reveals a film that is both more and less than the sum of its parts, a production that brings together talented performers and craftspeople in service of material that does not fully rise to their level, resulting in an experience that entertains without enlightening, satisfies without surprising, and concludes without quite convincing. Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War opens with a sequence in Dubai that immediately establishes the film's visual language of surveillance and counter-surveillance, where every reflective surface potentially conceals a threat and every casual interaction might be a deadly encounter waiting to unfold. A paranoid aesthetic that the series perfected over 4 seasons and that the film amplifies through its expanded budget and scope. The sound design during the extraction mission gone wrong deserves particular attention because it layers the mechanical whine of drone surveillance with the percussive crack of sniper fire and the panicked breathing of operatives who suddenly realize they have walked into an ambush, creating an auditory experience that communicates danger before the visuals fully register what is happening. A technique that puts the audience inside the chaos rather than observing it from a safe distance. Nigel Cook's death is filmed with an intimacy that makes it feel like more than just an inciting incident, the camera lingering on his face as he processes the betrayal and the fatal wound simultaneously. His final words to Ryan carrying the desperate urgency of a man who knows that the information he possesses will die with him unless he can transfer it to someone capable of understanding its significance and acting upon it before the conspiracy consumes everything he spent his career trying to protect. The screenplay makes an interesting structural choice by delaying the full revelation of Project Starling until after the audience has already witnessed its consequences, which means that we experience the conspiracy the way Ryan does, as a mystery that must be pieced together from fragments of information rather than a clearly defined threat. And this narrative strategy preserves suspense even as the action sequences provide the more conventional satisfactions of the genre. Jack Ryan's civilian life on Wall Street is sketched with efficient strokes that convey volumes about his psychological state, the sterile office environment, and the abstract nature of financial risk management, serving as a kind of sensory deprivation chamber after years of fieldwork. A self-imposed exile that represents his attempt to use his analytical gifts in a context where lives do not hang in the balance, and where the worst possible outcome is monetary loss rather than mass casualties. The scene in which James Greer tracks Ryan down at his office demonstrates the fundamental asymmetry of their relationship, because Greer knows exactly where Ryan is and what he is doing while Ryan has no idea that his former mentor has been watching him from a distance. A detail that speaks to the impossibility of truly leaving the intelligence community once one has been initiated into its secrets and its networks of obligation. Michael Kelly's Mike November provides the film with its most consistent source of levity, delivering deadpan observations about the absurdity of their situations that never undercut the tension, but instead acknowledge it in a way that feels authentically human. The gallows humor of professionals who have seen too much to take anything entirely seriously, but who continue to do the work anyway, because someone has to and because they have forgotten how to do anything else. The interrogation scene between Emma Marlowe and the captured Ryan and November crackles with a specific kind of intellectual electricity, as 3 highly trained operatives from allied nations circle each other verbally, each trying to determine how much the others know and whether they can be trusted. A sequence that plays out in a confined space, but feels as dynamic as any of the film's more physically expansive set pieces. Sienna Miller's Marlowe speaks in a rapid, almost clinical cadence that establishes her as someone who processes information faster than most people can deliver it, her questions overlapping with the answers before they are fully articulated, creating a characterization of an intelligence officer whose mind is always several steps ahead of the conversation. A quality that makes her eventual alliance with Ryan feel like a meeting of equals rather than a subordinate partnership. The London setting allows the film to engage with the architecture of institutional power in ways that the Dubai sequences cannot, as the characters move through government buildings and private clubs that have witnessed centuries of secrets being exchanged. The weight of history pressing down on every conversation about contemporary threats and the responses they demand. The scene in which Ryan confronts Greer at MI6 headquarters represents the emotional center of the film, because it is here that the personal and the political become completely inseparable. The younger man demanding accountability from the older one, while both of them understand that the systems they serve are built on exactly the kind of moral compromises that Greer made when he authorized Project Starling in the first place. Wendell Pierce plays this confrontation with a vulnerability that has rarely been visible in Greer before, the defensive posturing of a bureaucrat giving way to something closer to shame as he admits what he did and tries to explain why he believed it was necessary, an explanation that he seems to recognize as inadequate even as he delivers it. The rationalizations of a man who has spent too long inside the machinery to see it clearly from the outside. The film's treatment of post-9/11 security policy is more nuanced than its genre conventions might suggest, because it does not simply condemn or celebrate the extraordinary measures that intelligence agencies adopted in the wake of the attacks, but instead presents them as tragic necessities that produced both genuine security benefits and profound moral costs that continue to accumulate long after the original threat has evolved into something different. Liam Crown functions as the living embodiment of those accumulated costs, an operative who was trained to be a weapon and then discarded when the political winds shifted, left to navigate a world that had taught him only how to destroy and then told him that his methods were no longer acceptable, a rejection that curdled into a determination to prove that his way was not only necessary but inevitable. The car bomb that kills Elizabeth Wright is staged with a suddenness that makes it genuinely shocking, the mundane setting of a London street transforming into a scene of chaos and fire in an instant, and the film does not cut away from the aftermath but instead forces the audience to sit with the consequences. The burning vehicles and the screaming bystanders and the dawning horror that a major character has just been eliminated without warning or ceremony. Betty Gabriel's Wright had been established as a figure of competence and integrity, a director who understood the moral complexities of intelligence work without being paralyzed by them, and her removal from the narrative feels like a genuine loss rather than a plot convenience, a death that matters because the character mattered, however brief her screen time may have been. Ryan's decision to lie to Crown about the location of the stolen intelligence is a moment that reveals the core of his character, because he does not hesitate or calculate the odds, but instead instinctively does what is necessary to buy time, a reflex that has been honed by years of operating in situations where the truth is a luxury that can get people killed and deception is not a moral failing but a survival skill. The film's geography is carefully constructed to create a sense of global scope without losing narrative coherence, the movements between Dubai and London and back again following a logic that is driven by character decisions rather than arbitrary set-piece requirements. Each location change motivated by the investigation's evolving needs and the characters' shifting understanding of what they are actually confronting. The technical details of how intelligence work is conducted receive more attention than is typical for the genre, with scenes devoted to the mechanics of secure communications, the protocols for verifying identities, and the challenges of operating in environments where every electronic device is a potential vulnerability. Details that ground the more spectacular elements in a reality that feels credible rather than fantastical. The relationship between Ryan and November deepens in this film through shared adversity rather than explicit emotional expression. The two men communicating through glances and abbreviated phrases that carry the weight of years of collaboration. A shorthand that speaks to the intimacy that develops between people who have repeatedly trusted each other with their lives in situations where that trust was the only thing standing between survival and annihilation. Marlowe's integration into this established dynamic creates an interesting tension because she is an outsider to their specific history, but an insider to the broader culture of intelligence work. Fluent in the same operational language, but unfamiliar with the particular rhythms and references that Ryan and November have developed over their time together. A productive friction that generates both conflict and eventual respect. The film's depiction of MI6 internal politics adds a layer of complexity to the narrative, because the British intelligence service is presented not as a monolithic entity, but as an institution riven by factional disputes and personal rivalries. The revelation that Deputy Chief Spear is a traitor emerging from a context in which loyalty and betrayal are not binary states, but positions on a spectrum that shifts according to circumstances and incentives. J.J. Field's Spear is particularly effective because he plays the character as someone who does not see himself as a villain, a man who has rationalized his choices as pragmatic responses to an impossible situation rather than as betrayals of his oath and his colleagues. A self-deception that makes him more dangerous than someone motivated by simple greed or ideology because he can pass lie detector tests and maintain his cover through genuine belief in his own justifications. The action choreography throughout the film emphasizes the physical cost of violence, with characters accumulating injuries that affect their subsequent capabilities rather than shaking off wounds as if they were inconsequential. A commitment to consequence that raises the stakes of every confrontation because the audience understands that damage carries forward rather than resetting between scenes. The Dubai server sequence is the film's most sustained engagement with its techno-thriller heritage, as Ryan must navigate both physical security measures and digital encryption protocols while Crown's forces close in on his position. A sequence that crosscuts between the methodical work of data extraction and the escalating chaos of the approaching threat, creating a tension that derives from the collision of intellectual and physical peril. Arnaud Val's Colomer cinematography in this sequence uses color temperature to distinguish between the cool blue of the digital environment and the warm amber of the approaching danger. A visual code that communicates information to the audience at a subliminal level and helps orient us within a complex spatial and temporal framework where multiple things are happening simultaneously in different locations. Ramin Djawadi's score during the server sequence begins with a mechanical, almost algorithmic quality that mirrors the process of data extraction, then gradually introduces organic elements as the human threat becomes more immediate. The music tracking the shift from a technological problem to a physical confrontation with precision and emotional intelligence. Patrick's reappearance in Dubai provides a moment of continuity that rewards attentive viewers who remember his role from the series, his presence a reminder that the world of Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War is populated by a network of characters whose relationships extend beyond the boundaries of any single story. A density of interconnection that gives the fictional universe a lived-in quality that standalone films often lack. The film's pacing accelerates significantly in its final third, compressing the resolution of multiple plot threads into a concentrated sequence of revelations and confrontations. An acceleration that is both a strength in terms of maintaining momentum and a weakness in terms of giving certain developments the space they need to land with full emotional impact. Greer's rescue of Ryan and Marlowe during the climax is staged as a reversal of the film's opening, with the mentor now arriving to save the protégé rather than the protégé being drawn into the mentor's mess. A structural symmetry that suggests a resolution to the moral imbalance that has characterized their relationship since the revelation of Project Starling. The moment when Ryan shoots Crown is filmed without slow motion or musical crescendo, a deliberate anticlimax that refuses to aestheticize the act of killing, presenting it instead as a grim necessity that brings no satisfaction and solves only the immediate problem, while leaving the larger questions about institutional accountability and moral responsibility completely unresolved. The aftermath of Crown's death is treated with more gravity than is typical for the genre. The characters not celebrating their victory, but instead processing what has happened in a state of exhaustion and ambivalence, aware that they have stopped one manifestation of a problem that is far larger than any individual antagonist, and that the conditions that created Crown remain in place even after his elimination. Spear's arrest and removal from duty is presented as a bureaucratic procedure rather than a dramatic confrontation, a choice that emphasizes the institutional nature of the betrayal and the institutional nature of the response, suggesting that the system can police itself, even if that self-policing is slow and imperfect and ultimately insufficient to address the underlying pathologies that made the betrayal possible. The film's final scenes in Washington represent a return to the corridors of power that the series frequently depicted. But the tone is different now, more sober and less optimistic, the characters having been through something that has changed their understanding of what they do and why they do it, and whether any of it ultimately makes a difference in a world where threats evolve faster than the institutions designed to counter them. Ryan's acceptance of the deputy director position is portrayed with an ambivalence that the script wisely does not resolve, leaving the audience uncertain whether this represents a triumphant return to purpose or a capitulation to forces that Ryan had tried to escape. a deliberate ambiguity that respects the complexity of the character's situation and refuses to provide easy answers to questions that have no easy answers. The professional partnership between Ryan and Greer has been reconfigured by the film's events into something more equal than it was before, with Greer's moral authority diminished by the exposure of his secrets and Ryan's enhanced by his conduct during the crisis, a recalibration that positions them for a different kind of collaboration in whatever future the franchise might explore. The absence of Kathy from the narrative becomes more pronounced in these final scenes, as Ryan accepts a position that will define the rest of his professional life without any reference to a personal life that might be affected by that decision. A silence that speaks volumes about what the work has cost him and what he has sacrificed in order to continue doing it. The film's visual palette shifts in the Washington sequences from the warmer tones of the Middle East and London to a cooler, more institutional color scheme dominated by blues and grays. A visual cue that Ryan has re-entered the world of bureaucratic power with all its constraints and compromises, the vibrancy of fieldwork giving way to the muted tones of administration. The costume design reinforces this transition, with Ryan exchanging the practical clothing of an operative for the tailored suits of an executive, his body literally reinscribed by the institution, even as his mind remains shaped by the experiences that the clothing is designed to conceal. A tension between appearance and reality that the character will carry into whatever comes next. The final shot of the film holds on Ryan's face as he contemplates his new office, the camera lingering long enough for the audience to register the complexity of emotions that pass across Krasinski's features, pride and regret and determination and doubt all present simultaneously in a performance that trusts the audience to interpret rather than telling us what to feel. The film's treatment of its female characters, while limited by the constraints of a narrative focused primarily on male protagonists, avoids the more egregious patterns of the genre by ensuring that Marlowe and Wright are defined by their professional competence rather than their relationships to men. Characters who exist to do their jobs rather than to serve as romantic interests or motivational casualties, even when the plot requires that one of them die to raise the stakes. The geopolitical context of Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War reflects contemporary anxieties about the resurgence of great power competition and the persistence of non-state threats, a world in which the clear ideological lines of the Cold War have been replaced by a complex ecosystem of dangers that do not lend themselves to simple solutions or clean victories, a realism that distinguishes the film from more nostalgic entries in the spy genre. The film's engagement with the ethics of enhanced interrogation and targeted killing is implicit rather than explicit, woven into the fabric of the narrative rather than articulated through dialogue, a choice that trusts the audience to recognize the moral questions without needing them spelled out. Though this subtlety may also allow viewers to avoid confronting those questions if they prefer to experience the film as straightforward entertainment. The relationship between intelligence agencies and the private sector receives glancing attention through Ryan's Wall Street interlude, and the broader theme of how skills developed for national security purposes migrate into finance and consulting, a phenomenon that the film acknowledges without fully exploring, perhaps because a deeper investigation would require a different kind of story than the one being told. The film's use of technology as both tool and threat reflects the double-edged nature of the digital revolution in intelligence work, where the same capabilities that enable unprecedented surveillance and analysis also create new vulnerabilities and new avenues for exploitation by adversaries who have access to the same tools, an arms race with no finish line and no permanent advantage for either side. The legacy of the Cold War haunts the film, even though its explicit concerns are contemporary. The institutional structures and operational doctrines of the CIA and MI6 having been shaped by a conflict that ended decades ago, but whose assumptions continue to govern how threats are perceived and how responses are formulated, a path dependency that the film suggests may be as dangerous as any external enemy. The film's critical and commercial reception will likely be studied as a case in the challenges of translating serialized storytelling to feature format, the difficulties of satisfying existing fans while attracting new viewers, and the particular pressures that streaming platforms exert on creative decisions. Lessons that will inform future attempts to bridge the gap between television and cinema in an era when the distinction between the two becomes increasingly meaningless. Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War ultimately functions as both an ending and a beginning, concluding the narrative arc that began with the series while establishing a new status quo that could support additional stories. A transitional work that bears the scars of its dual identity, but also demonstrates the resilience of characters who have proven capable of surviving not only the dangers of their fictional world, but also the turbulence of an entertainment industry in constant flux, a testament to the enduring appeal of the reluctant hero who would rather think than fight, but will do what is necessary when thinking is no longer enough to keep the darkness at bay. The film's prologue in Dubai functions as more than mere action spectacle because it establishes the operational tempo that will govern the entire narrative, a rhythm of violence and consequence that never allows the audience to settle into complacency. Each moment of calm purchased at the cost of previous chaos, and destined to be disrupted by the next eruption of the conflict that Crown has set in motion across multiple continents simultaneously. The cinematographic choices during the Dubai extraction sequence employ a desaturated color palette that drains the vibrant city of its usual visual warmth, transforming the gleaming towers and artificial islands into a landscape of existential threat, where beauty becomes menacing and every reflective surface potentially conceals a sniper's scope or a surveillance device tracking the doomed operatives toward their fatal rendezvous with Crown's meticulously prepared ambush. The sound mixing during this opening sequence deserves scholarly attention because it layers multiple audio channels in ways that disorient the audience while providing crucial narrative information. The distant call to prayer mingling with encrypted radio communications and the ambient noise of urban life before being shattered by the percussive intrusion of gunfire that announces the transition from observation to engagement. Nigel Cook's characterization as a senior MI6 officer who has carried the burden of Project Starling for decades is conveyed through Douglas Hodges' weathered performance. Every line on his face telling a story of compromises made and secrets kept. The weight of operational decisions that seemed necessary at the time, but have aged into sources of shame that he can no longer rationalize away through appeals to exigency or patriotism. The cigarette pack that serves as the film's central MacGuffin contains within its innocuous exterior the entirety of the Starling network's operational history, a database of atrocities committed in the name of security that Cook has finally decided must be exposed. His conscience having reached a breaking point after decades of rationalization, and the accumulating evidence that the program he helped create has metastasized into something he can no longer recognize as serving any legitimate purpose. The screenplay's decision to make the MacGuffin a physical object rather than purely digital information is a canny narrative choice that grounds the abstract threat in something tangible. A decision that also creates opportunities for the kind of hand-to-hand transfers and desperate passes that have characterized spy fiction since its earliest iterations, connecting this contemporary story to a lineage that stretches back through Le Carre and Green to Conrad and beyond. Jack Ryan's professional trajectory from Marine officer to CIA analyst to Wall Street risk manager represents a complete cycle of American masculinity in the early 21st century. The movement from military service to government intelligence to private finance, tracing the path of institutional prestige and economic reward that has defined a generation of elite career progression in the post-Cold War landscape of perpetual contingency. The hedge fund environment where Ryan has sought refuge is depicted with careful attention to its sensory qualities, the hushed corridors and climate-controlled trading floors representing an almost monastic retreat from the chaos of field operations. A space where risk is abstracted into mathematical models and human lives never enter the equation except as statistical aggregates in actuarial tables that inform investment strategies. Krasinski's physical performance in these early Wall Street scenes communicates volumes about Ryan's psychological state through microexpressions and body language. The slight slump of shoulders that were once squared against operational danger. The eyes that have learned to focus on spreadsheets rather than threat assessments. The overall impression of a predator who has voluntarily entered a zoo and is trying to convince himself that the enclosure is freedom rather than captivity. The moment when Greer appears in Ryan's office is staged with the formal precision of a diplomatic encounter between nations that were once allies but have become estranged through circumstances neither fully controls. The careful politeness of their initial exchange barely concealing the currents of unresolved tension that flow beneath the surface of their professional courtesy. Wendell Pierce's Greer has evolved significantly from the character introduced in the series, his authority now institutional rather than operational, his movements constrained by the protocols of high office rather than liberated by the improvisational necessities of field command. A transformation that has made him more powerful in theory, but more vulnerable in practice, because his decisions must now account for political considerations that a station chief could safely ignore. The mission parameters that Greer presents to Ryan are deliberately vague, a recruitment pitch that relies on personal obligation rather than professional clarity. The older man knowing that the younger will not refuse a direct request even when the specifics remain obscured by the necessary deceptions that intelligence work requires as the price of its continued existence. Mike November's entrance into the narrative provides immediate relief from the tension of the Greer-Ryan reunion, because November operates entirely without the psychological complications that burden the other characters. His presence a reminder that some operatives manage to do this work for decades without being destroyed by it, whether through shallower emotional engagement or more robust psychological defenses, or simply the luck of having avoided the particular operations that might have broken someone less resilient. The dynamic between November and Ryan during their travel to Dubai recapitulates their series' chemistry while acknowledging the time that has passed, the easy banter now carrying undertones of shared history and mutual concern. Two men who have seen each other at their best and worst and have decided, without ever articulating the decision, that the bond between them is worth preserving despite the professional distance that Ryan's departure from the CIA has imposed. The Dubai meeting with Cook is the film's first genuine set piece of sustained tension. The camera alternating between tight close-ups of the characters' faces and wider shots that remind us of the surveillance environment in which the conversation is taking place, every word potentially monitored, every gesture possibly observed. The paranoia that defines intelligence work made visible through the film's visual grammar. Cook's death, immediately following the handover of the cigarette pack, transforms the object from a simple MacGuffin into something approaching a sacred relic, an item purchased with a man's life that now carries the weight of that sacrifice along with whatever operational intelligence it contains. A doubling of significance that raises the stakes for Ryan's mission beyond professional obligation into the realm of personal honor. The chase sequence that follows Cook's assassination demonstrates the film's approach to action filmmaking, which prioritizes spatial coherence over kinetic disorientation. The geography of the pursuit clearly established so that the audience can follow the movements of all parties and understand the tactical calculations being made in real time by characters who are thinking even as they are running. Emma Marlowe's capture of Ryan and November introduces her as a character who operates according to protocols that are recognizably professional even when they place her in apparent opposition to the protagonists, a narrative strategy that allows her eventual alliance with them to feel like a natural evolution of mutual respect rather than a contrived plot convenience. Sienna Miller's vocal performance as Marlowe is characterized by a particular rhythmic quality that sets her apart from the other characters. Her sentences delivered in rapid clusters that suggest a mind operating at speeds that verbal communication can barely accommodate. The impression of intelligence conveyed not through what she says, but through the velocity at which she says it. The interrogation scene that follows the capture is structured as a verbal chess match in which all three participants are simultaneously trying to determine the loyalties and knowledge of the others. A sequence that rewards attentive viewing, because every line of dialogue carries multiple possible interpretations, depending on what the audience has figured out about the larger conspiracy at any given moment. The revelation of Project Starling emerges from this interrogation, not as a single dramatic disclosure, but as a gradual understanding that dawns on Ryan and the audience simultaneously. The pieces of information that Marlowe provides combining with what Ryan already knows to form a picture that is more disturbing than any of the individual elements suggested on their own. The film's treatment of Project Starling as a creation of the immediate post-9/11 period grounds its fictional conspiracy in historical reality, connecting to documented programs of extraordinary rendition and enhanced interrogation that actual intelligence agencies implemented in the years following the attacks, a linkage that gives the story a political resonance beyond its genre conventions. Greer's authorship of Project Starling is the film's most significant character revelation because it fundamentally alters everything we understand about his relationship with Ryan. The mentorship now revealed to have been built on a foundation of concealed atrocities. The moral authority that Greer has always claimed now exposed as a performance constructed to hide the truth of what he authorized in the name of security. The London confrontation between Ryan and Greer at MI6 headquarters is the scene toward which the entire first half of the film has been building, a reckoning that has been deferred for years, but can no longer be avoided because the consequences of Greer's decisions have literally exploded into the present and killed people who had nothing to do with the original sin of Starling's creation. The production design of MI6 headquarters emphasizes the contrast between the institution's historical grandeur and the ugly realities of the work conducted within its walls. The wood-paneled offices and portraits of former chiefs, creating an atmosphere of gentlemanly discretion that is violently disrupted by the contemporary violence that has invaded the building's sanctum in the form of Ryan's moral fury. The film's use of London locations extends beyond the obvious landmarks to include the institutional architecture of British power, the clubs and ministries and safe houses where decisions are made that affect millions of lives without ever being subjected to democratic scrutiny. A shadow geography that the characters navigate with the familiarity of natives, even as the audience is made to feel like intruders in spaces not meant for public view. Elizabeth Wright's role as CIA director represents the institutionalization of the reforms that followed the exposure of programs like Starling in the real world. Her presence a signal that the agency has changed, even if the film immediately complicates that optimism by demonstrating that the old guard and its old methods have not been entirely eradicated, but have merely gone underground where they continue to operate without oversight or accountability. Betty Gabriel plays Wright with a combination of authority and vulnerability that makes her subsequent death feel like more than a plot device. The character established as a genuine leader whose loss will have consequences for the institution she headed, even if the narrative does not have time to explore those consequences in the compressed format of a feature film. The car bomb that kills Wright is the film's most effective demonstration of the thesis that Crown represents, which is that terrorism cannot be prevented by conventional means, and that only the kind of ruthless methods Starling employed can provide genuine security, an argument that the film presents through action rather than dialogue, forcing the audience to confront the possibility that the villain might have a point even if his methods are monstrous. The aftermath of Wright's death is handled with a restraint that makes the moment more powerful rather than less. The film refusing to exploit the tragedy for easy emotion while still acknowledging the gravity of what has happened. The characters processing their grief in ways that are consistent with their professional training and personal dispositions, rather than conforming to audience expectations of how mourning should look. Crown's plan to reactivate terrorist cells around the world represents a strategic vision that is perversely logical, a demonstration project designed to prove that only the methods he embodies can provide security in a world of persistent threat. His actions not motivated by ideology or profit, but by a desire for vindication that is arguably more dangerous because it cannot be satisfied through negotiation or compromise. Max Beesley's performance as Crown avoids the mannerisms that often characterize cinematic villains, presenting instead a man who is terrifying precisely because he is so ordinary, so recognizably human in his resentments and rationalizations, the banality of his evil making it more disturbing than any theatrical monstrosity could be. The relationship between Crown and Spear is sketched with an economy that leaves much to the imagination, but the implication is clear. Crown has found allies within the institutions he once served, men who share his convictions but lack his courage to act on them openly, content to facilitate his violence from positions of bureaucratic safety while maintaining their reputations as responsible public servants. J.J. Field's Spear embodies a particular type of institutional traitor, the man whose betrayal is motivated not by foreign allegiance or financial gain, but by agreement with the methods he is supposed to oppose. A true believer in Starling's necessity, who has maintained his position within MI6 precisely, so he could protect and enable the program's resurrection when the political climate shifted far enough to make its return conceivable. The film's middle section devotes significant attention to the procedural aspects of the investigation, showing Ryan and Marlowe working through the evidence methodically, testing hypotheses against available data, and gradually narrowing the range of possible explanations until only the truth remains. A process that honors the intellectual traditions of the spy thriller, even as the genre has increasingly abandoned those traditions in favor of pure action. The return to Dubai for the films. Climax creates a narrative arc that is aesthetically satisfying because it brings the story full circle. The city where the conspiracy was first encountered becoming the city where it is finally unraveled. A structural symmetry that suggests a world in which patterns repeat and locations accumulate significance through the events that occur within their boundaries. The server extraction sequence represents the film's most sustained engagement with its techno-thriller heritage, as Ryan must navigate both physical and digital security measures while the clock ticks down and Crown's forces close in. a sequence that crosscuts between the intellectual labor of data retrieval and the physical danger of approaching hostiles in a rhythm that generates genuine suspense from the collision of these two modes of threat. Patrick's role in facilitating the server access demonstrates the value of the extended network that intelligence work creates. Relationships forged in the heat of previous operations that persist across years and continents and can be activated when needed by those who have maintained them through the kind of ongoing reciprocity that distinguishes genuine professional communities from mere collections of former colleagues. The digital interface through which Ryan accesses the Starling data is rendered with enough technical specificity to feel credible while remaining legible to audiences without computer science backgrounds. A balancing act that the film manages successfully by focusing on the human reactions to the information rather than the technical details of its extraction and decryption. The data that Ryan downloads reveals not only the extent of Starling's operations, but also the identities of everyone involved. A comprehensive record that Cook had assembled as both insurance and confession, the dual purpose of the information reflecting the dual nature of the man who collected it, at once protecting himself and preparing for the reckoning he knew must eventually come. The revelation of Spears' treason is presented as a piece of data among many, a name on a list that carries more weight because of its bureaucratic presentation rather than despite it, the banality of the format underscoring the banality of the betrayal. Another piece of information to be processed and acted upon rather than a dramatic twist to be milked for shock value. Crown's attack on the facility where Ryan is downloading the data transforms the technological sequence into a physical confrontation. The two modes of threat that the film has been tracking finally converging in a single location where the characters must simultaneously complete the digital mission and survive the physical assault. A convergence that generates the film's most sustained sequence of tension. Marlowe's injury during the attack introduces an element of vulnerability that the character has not previously displayed. Her competence as an operative now compromised by physical damage that she cannot simply overcome through willpower or training. A reminder that even the most capable professionals are ultimately subject to the limitations of their bodies. Greer's arrival with reinforcements inverts the rescue dynamic that the series established, where Greer was typically the one extracting Ryan from dangerous situations. A reversal that signifies the shift in their relationship that the film's revelations have produced and positions Greer as someone who is now making amends rather than giving orders. The tactical choreography of the final firefight emphasizes the professionalism of all parties involved. Crown's operatives and Greer's reinforcements moving with the coordinated precision of elite military units. The outcome determined not by individual heroism, but by the collective application of training and resources. A realism that honors the operational authenticity the series has always pursued. The moment when Ryan shoots Crown is stripped of the cinematic embellishments that typically accompany such climactic killings. No swelling music or slow-motion photography. Just the flat report of a firearm and the sudden cessation of a threat that has driven the entire narrative. An aesthetic choice that refuses to make the act of killing feel triumphant or satisfying. The aftermath of Crown's death is treated with an emotional complexity that is rare in the genre. The characters not celebrating or making quips, but instead processing what has happened in the heavy silence of people who understand that they have ended a life, however necessary that ending might have been, and that the necessity does not erase the moral weight of the act. Spears' arrest is handled off-screen through a brief exchange of dialogue, a choice that might seem anticlimactic, but that actually reinforces the film's thematic emphasis on institutional accountability. The suggestion being that the system can handle its own housekeeping without the protagonists needing to be personally involved in every aspect of the resolution. The final scenes in Washington depict the aftermath of the crisis with an attention to bureaucratic process that is unusual for the genre. The characters attending meetings and receiving briefings and navigating the procedural requirements of their positions. A return to normalcy that feels both reassuring and slightly hollow after the intensity of what has preceded it. Ryan's nomination as deputy director is presented as both an honor and a sentence, the recognition of his capabilities carrying with it the burden of institutional responsibility that will remove him from the field work that has defined his professional identity. A promotion that is also an exile from the operational life he has repeatedly tried to escape, but has also repeatedly been drawn back into. The professional relationship between Ryan and Greer has been reconfigured by the film's events into something approaching equality. The mentor's moral authority having been compromised by the exposure of his secrets while the protégé's has been enhanced by his conduct during the crisis, a recalibration that positions them for a different kind of partnership in whatever comes next. The film's final image holds on Ryan's face as he surveys his new office, the expression on Krasinski's features, communicating a complex mixture of emotions that the script wisely declines to articulate through dialogue, trusting the audience to read the character's ambivalence in the micro-expressions that play across the actor's face as the frame holds and the music swells and the story that began with the series reaches its provisional conclusion. The overarching achievement of Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War is its successful translation of serialized television storytelling into a feature-length format without completely losing the qualities that made the series distinctive, a balancing act that produces inevitable compromises, but that also demonstrates the resilience of these characters and this fictional universe, which have survived the transition from novels to films to television to streaming features while retaining enough of their essential identity to remain recognizable to audiences who have followed Jack Ryan across decades and formats and the shifting landscape of American popular culture. The geopolitical landscape that the film navigates reflects a world in which the clarity of Cold War binaries has dissolved into a complex ecosystem of threats that resist simple categorization, where former allies can harbor traitors within their leadership structures and where the weapons developed to fight the last war prove inadequate against the adversaries who have studied those weapons and adapted their strategies accordingly, a realism that distinguishes the film from more nostalgic entries in the genre. The opening sequence's choreography of violence is constructed with a documentarian's attention to the chaos of actual combat, the camera refusing to glamorize the deaths of Cook's team members, but instead capturing the sudden, inglorious way that trained professionals can be eliminated when they walk into an ambush prepared by someone who knows their protocols intimately and has designed a trap specifically to exploit the patterns those protocols create. The film's soundscape during the Dubai extraction employs a technique of layered audio that mimics the cognitive experience of someone trying to process multiple streams of information simultaneously while under fire. The competing sounds of gunfire and radio communication and environmental noise creating an auditory chaos from which the brain must extract the signals that will enable survival. A subjective approach to sound design that places the audience inside the perceptual experience of the characters rather than observing it from a safe distance. Nigel Cook's desperation in his final moments is conveyed through physical performance as much as dialogue. The tremor in his hands as he passes the cigarette pack to Ryan, suggesting a man who has carried a burden for so long that his body has begun to betray him. The physiological cost of decades of secrecy manifesting in symptoms that no amount of professional discipline can suppress when the moment of reckoning finally arrives. The cigarette pack itself deserves analysis as an object of material culture within the film's fictional world, its worn cardboard and faded printing suggesting years of handling by a man who kept it close as both insurance policy and confession. A physical artifact in an age of digital information that carries the tactile evidence of its history in a way that encrypted files never could. Its very materiality a rebuke to the abstraction of contemporary intelligence gathering. The transition from the Dubai prologue to Ryan's civilian life on Wall Street is marked by a dramatic shift in color grading, the warm amber tones of the Middle Eastern setting giving way to the cool blue-gray palette of the financial district, a visual language that communicates the emotional temperature of Ryan's self-imposed exile before any dialogue confirms what the imagery has already told us about his psychological state. The hedge fund environment where Ryan has sought anonymity is rendered with a precision that captures the particular aesthetic of contemporary finance. The minimalist decor and ergonomic furniture and ubiquitous screens, creating a sensory environment designed to eliminate distraction and focus attention entirely on the abstract movements of capital. A space that is the opposite of the chaotic unpredictability of field operations, and therefore precisely what a traumatized former operative might seek as sanctuary. Krasinski's embodiment of Ryan in these Wall Street scenes communicates withdrawal through a subtle physical vocabulary, the character occupying space differently than he did during his active service, his gestures more contained, his posture more defensive, his eyes moving with the quick scanning pattern of someone who has trained himself to assess threats, but is now applying that skill in an environment where the only dangers are financial rather than lethal. The arrival of Greer into this carefully constructed refuge represents an intrusion of the past into a present that was designed specifically to exclude it, the older man's presence in Ryan's office feeling like a violation of a sanctuary, a reminder that the world Ryan left behind has not forgotten him and will not allow him to forget it. No matter how effectively he has reconstructed his identity around the denial of his previous self. Wendell Pierce's performance in this scene is masterful in its restraint, Greer deploying the full arsenal of his interpersonal skills to manipulate Ryan into compliance without ever appearing to manipulate. The request presented as a favor between friends, even though both men understand that the power dynamics of their relationship make refusal impossible. The velvet glove of personal loyalty, concealing the iron fist of institutional obligation. The recruitment scene functions as a microcosm of the film's larger thematic concerns about whether anyone can truly leave the intelligence community. The answer suggested by the narrative being a definitive negative, the skills and relationships and obligations cultivated during service creating bonds that cannot be severed by resignation letters or changes of address. A deterministic view of professional identity that is both romantic in its conception of vocation and tragic in its implications for personal freedom. Mike November's reintroduction into the narrative provides a counterpoint to the psychological complexity of the Ryan Greer dynamic, his character operating on a simpler emotional register that the film uses as both comic relief and a reminder that not everyone in this world is burdened by existential questions about the morality of their work. Some operatives having made peace with the ethical ambiguities of their profession through a pragmatic acceptance that the film neither endorses nor condemns, but simply presents as one possible adaptation to an impossible job. Michael Kelly's performance as November is characterized by a physical ease that contrasts with Ryan's tension and Greer's formality. His body moving through spaces with the confidence of someone who has survived countless dangerous situations and has internalized the lessons of those experiences to the point where operational readiness has become a default state rather than a conscious effort. A walking embodiment of the institutional knowledge that cannot be taught in training courses but must be acquired through the accumulation of near-death experiences over decades of service. The travel sequence that brings Ryan and November to Dubai serves multiple narrative functions simultaneously, advancing the plot while re-establishing the rapport between characters who have been separated by Ryan's departure from the CIA. The confined space of the aircraft creating an enforced intimacy that allows for the kind of personal conversation that would feel artificial in a more formal setting. The dialogue moving between operational planning and personal catching up with a fluidity that reflects the way professional and personal concerns are always intertwined in the lives of intelligence operatives. The Dubai that the film depicts is a city of surfaces and reflections, its architecture characterized by glass and steel and water features that create a constantly shifting visual environment where nothing is quite what it appears to be. A setting that is perfectly suited to a narrative about hidden identities and concealed agendas. The built environment itself becoming a metaphor for the epistemological challenges that define intelligence work in an era of ubiquitous surveillance and manufactured authenticity. The meeting with Cook takes place in a location that is carefully chosen for its operational security characteristics. A space where sight lines can be controlled and exit routes are known and the probability of hostile surveillance is minimized. The film taking the time to establish these details not through exposition, but through the camera's attention to the environment, trusting the audience to understand the tactical considerations without having them explained through dialogue. Cook's death immediately following the handover transforms a routine intelligence exchange into a crisis, the sudden violence shattering the carefully constructed security of the meeting and forcing Ryan and November to transition instantly from passive recipients of information to active participants in a combat situation. A shift that the film executes with an abruptness that mirrors the experience of the characters, denying the audience the preparatory beats that would cushion the impact of the violence. The subsequent chase sequence through Dubai's streets is constructed as a series of tactical decisions rather than a continuous spectacle. The film cutting between Ryan and November's efforts to evade pursuit and Crown's operatives' efforts to close the net. The cross-cutting creating a sense of simultaneous action that generates suspense through the collision of competing strategies rather than through the accumulation of explosions and property damage. Emma Marlowe's intervention in the chase introduces a third party into what had been a binary conflict, her capture of Ryan and November complicating the narrative in ways that will take the remainder of the film to fully unravel. Her presence a reminder that the world of international intelligence is populated by more actors than just the Americans and their adversaries. each with their own agendas and protocols and thresholds for what they are willing to do in pursuit of their objectives. Sienna Miller's physical performance as Marlowe is characterized by an economy of movement that suggests extensive training. Her character handling weapons and restraints with the practiced ease of someone for whom these tools are as familiar as kitchen utensils. The competence conveyed through action rather than dialogue. A demonstration of capability that establishes her as a credible operative before the script has provided any information about her background or affiliations. The interrogation scene that follows Marlowe's capture of Ryan in November is the film's most dialogue-intensive sequence. An extended verbal confrontation in which information is exchanged and withheld and tested for veracity through a process that resembles a high-stakes academic seminar more than the brutal interrogations that less sophisticated spy films typically depict. The violence here being intellectual rather than physical, the weapons being questions and answers, and the strategic deployment of partial truths. The gradual revelation of Project Starling through this interrogation is structured as a pedagogical process, with Marlowe educating Ryan about a history he did not know existed. Her disclosures calibrated to bring him along a journey of understanding that will eventually lead him to question everything he thought he knew about his mentor and about the institution he served. An education that is also an indoctrination into a more cynical understanding of how intelligence work actually operates. Beneath its legitimizing rhetoric, the film's treatment of the post-9/11 security apparatus is more sophisticated than simple condemnation or endorsement, presenting Project Starling as a response to a genuine threat that was implemented by people who believed they were acting in their country's best interests. Even as the film also demonstrates the corrosive long-term effects of operating outside legal and ethical constraints, both an approach to moral complexity that respects the audience's capacity to hold contradictory assessments simultaneously. Greer's authorship of Starling is the revelation that reconfigures the entire narrative, transforming what appeared to be a story about a rogue operative into a story about institutional accountability and the intergenerational transmission of moral injury. The sins of the mentor being visited upon the protege, not through direct inheritance, but through the structural conditions that the mentor's decisions created, and that the protege must now navigate without the guidance he once trusted. Implicitly, the London confrontation between Ryan and Greer is staged in an office that embodies the institutional weight of MI6, the wood paneling and leather furniture, and framed photographs of predecessors, creating an atmosphere of tradition and continuity that is violently disrupted by the contemporary moral crisis that has invaded this sanctum. The setting itself becoming an argument about whether the institutions that these characters serve are capable of the self-examination that the moment demands. Wendell Pierce's performance during this confrontation reveals layers of Greer's character that the series had only hinted at, the defensive bureaucrat giving way to something more vulnerable, as Ryan's questions penetrate the defenses that Greer has constructed over decades of justifying his decisions to himself. The performance suggesting that Greer has never fully reconciled himself to what he authorized and has instead managed the cognitive dissonance through compartmentalization and avoidance, strategies that are no longer available now that the consequences of his decisions have manifested in the form of Liam Crown. The film's depiction of the institutional response to the Starling revelation is carefully calibrated to avoid both naive optimism and cynical despair, showing MI6 and the CIA as organizations capable of recognizing their failures and taking corrective action, even as those corrections are partial and belated and insufficient to undo the damage that has already been done. A realism about institutional behavior that acknowledges the possibility of reform without pretending that reform can erase history. Elizabeth Wright's role in the institutional response is particularly significant because she represents a generation of intelligence leadership that was not directly involved in the creation of programs like Starling. Her perspective shaped by the reforms that followed the exposure of post-9/11 excesses, rather than by the exigencies that produced those excesses. A difference in generational experience that creates both opportunities for change and tensions with those who remember the earlier era and its justifications. Betty Gabriel's performance as Wright conveys authority without authoritarianism, her character exercising power through persuasion and procedural legitimacy rather than through intimidation or appeals to emergency. A leadership style that represents an alternative to the model that produced Starling, and that the film presents as genuinely different even as it also demonstrates the vulnerability of that model to actors like Crown who refuse to play by the rules that constrain legitimate authorities. The car bomb that kills Wright is the film's most effective argument for Crown's worldview, a demonstration that conventional security measures cannot protect against an adversary who is willing to operate outside all constraints. The attack succeeding not because of sophisticated planning, but because of a willingness to use methods that legitimate agencies have forsworn. A tactical asymmetry that Crown believes proves his thesis about the necessity of programs like Starling. The aftermath of the bombing is depicted with a restraint that makes the violence more impactful rather than less. The film refusing to exploit the tragedy for cheap emotional manipulation while still acknowledging the human cost of the attack. The characters processing the loss in ways that are consistent with their professional training and personal dispositions. Grief expressed through continued action rather than through the performative mourning that less sophisticated films might deploy. Crown's strategic vision emerges through the investigation that follows Wright's death. The characters gradually understanding that the attack was not an end in itself, but a demonstration designed to prove a point. A piece of theater intended to show that the threat of terrorism persists and will always persist, and that only the methods Crown embodies can provide meaningful security. An argument made through violence that the film presents as monstrous, but not irrational. Max Beesley's performance as Crown is characterized by a stillness that is more unsettling than overt menace would be. His character moving through the world with the calm of someone who has completely resolved any internal conflicts about his actions. The serenity of true belief making him more terrifying than any frothing fanatic could be. A depiction of evil that locates its horror in the absence of doubt rather than in the presence of rage. The investigation that Ryan and Marlowe conduct into Crown's network is depicted with a procedural attention to detail that honors the intelligence-gathering traditions of the genre. The characters following leads and analyzing data and testing hypotheses through a process that is methodical rather than intuitive. The solution emerging from the accumulation of evidence rather than from a moment of inspired insight. A realism about how investigations actually work that distinguishes the film from more fanciful depictions of detective work. The return to Dubai for the film's climax creates a narrative symmetry that is aesthetically satisfying while also serving the practical requirements of the plot. The location where the conspiracy was first encountered becoming the location where it is finally unraveled. A structural choice that gives the geography of the film a coherence that reinforces its thematic concerns about the persistence of the past and the difficulty of escaping the consequences of actions taken years before. The server extraction sequence represents the culmination of the film's techno-thriller elements. Ryan's analytical skills finally deployed in their proper context after being sidelined for much of the narrative by the demands of action set pieces. The sequence rewarding viewers who have been waiting for the franchise to return to its roots in intellectual problem-solving rather than physical confrontation. The digital interface through which Ryan accesses the Starling data is designed with enough technical specificity to feel credible while remaining legible to audiences without specialized knowledge. The film trusting viewers to follow the emotional stakes of the sequence, even if they do not understand the technical details of what Ryan is doing. The drama emerging from the race against time and the approaching threat rather than from the specifics of the data manipulation. Patrick's role in facilitating the server access is a small but significant element of the film's world building. His presence a reminder that the intelligence community extends beyond the main characters to include a network of specialists whose contributions are essential even if they never receive the recognition that the protagonists enjoy. An acknowledgement of the collaborative nature of intelligence work that is often elided in more hero-centric narratives. The data that Ryan downloads represents the complete record of Project Starling, a comprehensive accounting of everything that was done in the name of security that Cook had assembled over decades as both insurance against betrayal and preparation for the reckoning he knew must eventually come. The information itself becoming a character in the narrative. An object that multiple parties seek to control or destroy because it contains the power to reshape the institutional landscape of international intelligence. The revelation of Spear's treason is embedded within this data rather than presented as a dramatic twist, a name on a list that carries more weight because of its bureaucratic presentation, the banality of the format underscoring the banality of the betrayal. A choice that reflects the film's commitment to depicting intelligence work as it is actually conducted rather than as it appears in more sensationalistic treatments. Crown's attack on the facility represents the collision of the film's two modes of threat, the technological and the physical converging in a single sequence that requires Ryan to simultaneously complete the data extraction and survive the assault. a convergence that generates the film's most sustained tension by combining intellectual and physical peril in a way that the earlier sequences kept separate. Marlowe's injury during the attack introduces vulnerability into a character who has previously been defined by her competence, the physical limitation forcing both her and Ryan to adapt their tactics in ways that create dramatic interest, while also humanizing a character who might otherwise seem superhumanly capable. A reminder that even the most skilled operatives are subject to the vulnerabilities of the bodies they inhabit. Greer's arrival with reinforcements represents the resolution of his character arc. The mentor who created the problem finally taking direct action to contain it, his rescue of Ryan, and Marlowe a form of atonement that does not erase his culpability, but does demonstrate his commitment to doing what can be done to limit the damage his decisions have caused. An imperfect redemption that the film presents as the best that can be hoped for in a world where full redemption is impossible. The tactical execution of the rescue is depicted with a professionalism that reflects the capabilities of the organizations involved. Greer's team moving with coordinated precision that contrasts with the chaos of the earlier ambush. The difference explained by preparation and intelligence rather than by any inherent superiority. A realism about military operations that respects the complexity of the factors that determine success or failure in combat. The final confrontation between Ryan and Crown is stripped of the stylistic embellishments that typically accompany climactic killings in action cinema. Presented instead as a grim necessity that brings no satisfaction and solves only the immediate problem, while leaving the larger questions about institutional accountability and moral responsibility completely unresolved. An aesthetic choice that refuses to let the audience experience the killing as catharsis. The aftermath of Crown's death is treated with a gravity that is unusual for the genre. The characters not celebrating their survival, but processing what has happened in a state of exhaustion that is both physical and moral. The weight of what they have done and witnessed settling over them in the sudden quiet that follows the cessation of violence. A depiction of the psychological cost of operational work that honors the experiences of actual intelligence professionals. Spears' arrest occurs off-screen and is reported through dialogue, a choice that might seem anticlimactic, but that reinforces the film's thematic emphasis on institutional process. The suggestion being that the exposure of treason is sufficient to trigger the mechanisms of accountability without requiring the protagonists to be personally involved in every arrest. The system capable of policing itself, once the truth has been made available to those with the authority to act on it. The Washington. Sequences that conclude the film depict the aftermath of the crisis with an attention to bureaucratic process that is rare in the genre. The characters attending meetings and receiving briefings and navigating the procedural requirements of their positions. A return to normalcy that feels both reassuring and slightly hollow after the intensity of what has preceded it. The rhythms of institutional life reasserting themselves over the chaos that briefly disrupted them. Ryan's nomination as deputy director is presented with an ambivalence that the script wisely does not resolve. The recognition of his capabilities carrying with it the implication that he will now be permanently removed from the field work that has defined his professional identity. A promotion that is also an exile from the operational life he has repeatedly tried to escape, but has also repeatedly been drawn back into by circumstances beyond his control. The professional relationship between Ryan and Greer in the film's final scenes has been reconfigured by the revelations and experiences of the narrative. The mentor's moral authority diminished by the exposure of his secrets, while the protégé's has been enhanced by his conduct during the crisis. A recalibration that positions them for a different kind of partnership in whatever future the franchise might explore. One based on mutual accountability rather than on the hierarchical model that previously structured their interactions. The final image of the film holds on Krasinski's face as Ryan surveys his new office, the expression communicating a complexity of emotion that the screenplay trusts the audience to interpret without the assistance of explanatory dialogue. Pride and regret and determination and doubt all visible simultaneously in a performance that synthesizes the character's entire journey across the series and the film into a single sustained moment of wordless reflection. The cinematography of this final scene returns to the cool institutional palette that characterized the Washington sequences. The blue-gray tones suggesting the bureaucratic environment that Ryan has now fully entered. The warmth of the Middle Eastern and European settings replaced by the climate-controlled neutrality of the corridors of power. A visual language that communicates the nature of Ryan's new position before any dialogue confirms what the imagery has already established. The costume design in these final scenes completes Ryan's transformation from operative to executive. The practical clothing of fieldwork replaced by tailored suits that signal his incorporation into the institutional hierarchy. His body literally dressed for a role that represents the culmination of his professional trajectory, even as his expression suggests ambivalence about the destination at which he has arrived. The film's treatment of closure is characteristically complex, providing enough resolution to satisfy the immediate narrative while leaving open questions that resist easy answers. The conspiracy thwarted, and the villain killed, but the conditions that produced both the conspiracy and the villain remaining in place. A realism about the persistence of structural problems that acknowledges the limits of individual action, even as it celebrates the individuals who act. The absence of Kathy from the narrative is felt most acutely in these final scenes. Ryan accepting a position that will define the rest of his professional life without any reference to a personal life that might be affected by that decision. A silence that speaks volumes about what the work has cost him and about the choices he has made to prioritize professional obligation over personal connection. A sacrifice that the film presents without either celebrating or condemning. The legacy of Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Ghost War within the broader franchise will likely be determined by whether future installments materialize to continue the story or whether this film stands as the conclusion to the particular iteration of the character that Krasinski and Pierce have developed. A question that remains open as the film ends with Ryan and Greer positioned for a new chapter that may or may not ever be written. The uncertainty itself becoming a final commentary on the open-ended nature of the intelligence work that the franchise has depicted across decades and formats and the evolving landscape of American popular culture.